Moderated by another one of my close friends, Amber Littlejohn. Everybody give them a hand as they make their way up to the stage. Also, I'll be selling Beau Whitney fan club t-shirts in the back if anybody wants one. I'm not joking.
Hello, everyone. So medical cannabis used to be the topic. You know, when we talk about reform, when we talk about change, it was all medical cannabis. And when we think about what has been the tip of the spear around the country when it comes to legalization, it is medical cannabis. You have overwhelming bipartisan support for medical cannabis. When it comes to the conversations that you've been hearing here today, you hear a lot about, of course, this is a capital conference, but this is a capital and policy conference, so we want to try and introduce some other elements here today. We hear a lot about rescheduling. We hear a lot about safe banking. And these are critical pieces of the discussion. But rightfully, there are a lot of people who have grave concerns. Okay, well, what happens to medical cannabis with Schedule 3? And I think a lot of those concerns are based in misunderstanding of what happens and what doesn't happen as it concerns Schedule 3 and any rescheduling efforts, but some of them are founded. The reality is that we will have a long journey to legalization of medical cannabis, and we need to start looking now at what that framework will look like, and again, beginning to set the standards for ourselves and really guide the industry into a place where we are prepared for this journey. So I'm going to go through and have the gentlemen introduce themselves.
Hello, I am Bryan Barash, Vice President at Dutchie, the largest technology provider in the cannabis space.
Hello, I'm Rob Sechrist, co-founder of Pelorus Capital Group. We manage two strategies. We have a private credit strategy and an income or an equity strategy. We're the first dedicated lender in the sector, and we also are repositioning assets across the country as well as we're seeing the distress in the market. We're trying to save those businesses, the ones that we can, and fold them into a broader ecosystem.
Michael Hennessey, Senior Vice President at NFP. It's a division of Aon. Been working with cannabis operators since 2017 on all things related to insurance.
I'm Beau Whitney, Chief Economist at Whitney Economics. We're a data and analytics provider in the U.S. and internationally. Some of the reports that we put out recently a free report on THC beverages, looking at the total addressable market. We put out reports on the total addressable market for cannabinoids, and so you often hear the $28 billion total addressable market. Those are numbers from my firm. But I'm not just a hemp homie. We also have information out on delinquencies and the total amount of debt. Green Check Verified and Sechrist sponsored a report a year or two ago that we presented one of these forums on how much debt financing there's required. So even though we work in this space, we don't take a position on the legality and the legalization of cannabis. We just provide the data in an unbiased manner.
So again, I think with the excitement that we've seen in the last few years around just full-scale adult use legalization, again, the discussion around medical sometimes slips into the background. So Beau, I'm going to start with you just to level set. What is the current size, estimated size, do you think, of the current medical cannabis market?
Well, in normal, each market is different because each state policy is different. But when all is said and done, typically when a market converts from medical to adult use, there's an 8 to 10x increase in sales. And so if you look at that from a true market perspective, based upon a $35 billion industry right now, it's about $3 to $5 billion, maybe 10 at the most. But when you look at NIH studies and you look at the amount of cost savings that states glean from providing access, just from a pain management, inflammation, and anxiety medicine perspective, there's about a 10% or 11% cost savings. And so on a valuation of that between $550 billion and $750 billion, there's about a $65 billion market opportunity for medical cannabis in this space. Now, that's not including wellness. Wellness and cannatourism is a big industry. It's a $313 billion industry in the United States. And about 10% of that is cannatourism, canna-wellness tourism. But that's kind of at risk right now, the $31 billion of potential in cannatourism or wellness tourism, that's at risk, as is women's health issues and women's treatment using cannabinoids for women's health issues. So that's kind of at risk. But overall, 60-ish, $65 billion market.
Amber, if I can add to that, what we've seen with our borrowers and our portfolio companies is that once the state goes recreational, nobody puts up their medical card because there's no advantage. You don't get any price savings. You're not getting insurance rebates. So it's hard to delineate once it goes recreational. It just becomes a market.
That's a good point, and I will say it is partly state dependent, right? If the state makes it easy and convenient to still shop as a medical patient and for stores to still serve medical patients, you see more of it. If they make it more difficult, then a lot of stores just forego it.
I just gave a speech in Bordeaux, France at a medical conference there, and the determining factor on whether or not there'll be successful rollouts of medical cannabis in France is whether or not there will be reimbursements from insurance companies. So insurance reimbursements is a real fundamental issue when it comes to medical cannabis.
So Bryan, you have been part of a movement here in DC, vocal and right out front in support of Schedule III. And so, again, speaking to a lot of concerns that exist around what would happen to medical cannabis, would medical cannabis cease to exist under Schedule III? Would it automatically become an unapproved drug, automatically kind of fold underneath pharmaceutical patents? So what would this be an existential crisis, or what would be the impact?
No. I should probably add to that, shouldn't I? So just to do a little backing up here, the rescheduling process is one that has been tried many times by the FDA, but has never happened to an entire category of drugs the way that we are embarking on with cannabis. So cannabis is currently in Schedule I, which means there is no known medical use for it and high chance of abuse. The FDA recommended moving it to Schedule III, as I think everybody knows. We now need DEA and the administration to finish that process, to formalize that. So what does this mean for existing cannabis operators? It means, I think as we all know, that by definition, the 280E tax no longer applies. And I want to be really clear about this. It no longer applies to anybody selling cannabis, legally or illegally, whether in a state market or not. It is a definitional aspect of 280E. It only applies to Schedule I and II drugs. If cannabis is moved to 3, nobody will have to pay the 280E tax anymore. In terms of what else that means, while I think there is a small sliver of room for debate, I think it's pretty clear to most of us who have been active in this space that an attempt to liberalize the schedule of cannabis would not lead to a crackdown on the already existing state markets. The whole point of doing this is to make it easier, not harder, to operate in those state markets. They currently operate outside of the realm of what's allowed under Schedule I. We would fully expect them to continue to do so outside of the realm of what's allowed under Schedule III. One other point I would just quickly make is that you can already bring a cannabis-derived drug to market through the formal FDA process now. It's already happened. That is not going to change. You would still have to go through medical trials and follow the FDA process, people could certainly pursue that. That may be easier under Schedule 3. But the existing state legal markets, we expect, would continue to operate exactly as they do now.
And we would agree with that. And there's also a DEA federal license program for research and doing those drugs as well.
So there's 26 states that are tied to the scheduling. And so, like in my state of Oregon, it would automatically trigger dispensaries to convert over, or to the selling of Schedule 3 drugs to be sold only in pharmacies. So there need to be some reconfiguration of the state regulatory programs, and so that's going to take some time. And there's a letter from the IACPA, the International Association of CPA group, that has requested clarification on, from the IRS and from others, on what will happen if people are selling Schedule 3 drugs without being approved by the DEA, and will that be subject to 280E? So that's still a debate that's occurring.
One of the challenges, again, that I think, and that is a common concern that I hear across the board, one of the challenges that we have when we look at it from that perspective is that Schedule 3 does not automatically make cannabis a drug, subject to the traditional jurisdiction of FDA. There are times where FDA will assert jurisdiction, and they can do that right now. So if you make a claim that your medical cannabis can cure cancer, then now you are marketing that drug, that cannabis, as a drug. But the same would apply for the Starbucks I just left in the back, that if I told you it can cure cancer, now you have FDA jurisdiction. So there is, so the very act of being rescheduled just means that it is, slightly less illegal than it was when it was at Schedule 1, but it doesn't make it a drug subject to the explicit compliance requirements of pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, and I would say, legal, illegal, those are easy words to throw around, and we hear them a lot in our industry. I try not to describe them that way. I think there's a practical reality, right, that currently you can sell cannabis. It's just there's a state and federal legal misalignment in how the state says you can do it and the federal government says you can do it. It happens. The government doesn't crack down on it, right? So we're in this space right now where there's this misalignment. I think the key part for me is under Schedule 3, that misalignment would continue to exist. So it wouldn't do anything to formalize a federal and state policy that both make sense with the way we sell cannabis now. We need further action for that to happen.
From a data perspective, we've built models on the impact of 280E and how much additional taxation there is above and beyond being treated as normal businesses. In 2025, we're projecting that it'll increase federal tax liabilities to the tune of $2.8 billion industry-wide. So that's a pretty significant hit, which could have a stimulative effect to the overall market, assuming that it's realized and there's not any of these hiccups and clarifications that occur.
As somebody who sometimes plays lobbyist, but most of the time I'm a lawyer, my affinity towards the word illegal is probably different, in part because I think it's important for people to be realistic in understanding what changes and doesn't change. We all know that we are engaged in a business where there is a disconnect between federal and state law. But when it comes to what changes, what is illegal now, really doesn't change. And FDA has expressed that it's not really their purview. So when we're just talking about the legality and controlled substances, that is not FDA's purview. And so they're going to be looking at what they enforce and their wheelhouse, which is drugs and other products presenting themselves as drugs or unapproved new drugs. And the switch to Schedule 3 doesn't do that automatically. Let's see. For you, Rob. So, Rob, when you are looking into the future at medical cannabis companies, what does being well-positioned look like? I think something that we have seen over the past week is an industry growing and existing and thriving, and then running straight into a wall with a disconnect between its preparedness from a standards and a regulatory perspective. So when it comes to looking at what a medical cannabis company that is positioned well for the future looks like, what is that?
We don't look at it and define it between medical or recreational. We, as deployers of capital, want the safe harbor to make sure that there's no ability to prosecute, and the funds have been extinguished from Congress. And so for us, we're only looking for the state to be a medically approved state, and there's not a single state that's recreational that's not also medically. So once that's happened, we don't define if this company or what parts of this company is medical. And in fact, when you look at the ecosystem of the company, the purpose of that product is not decided in most states, as far as all the states that we're in. And there's one that we're not, that it is the case, but it's not delineated what type of product it is until the point of sale. So at what point would you be saying that that's a medical product?
I mean, is that something that maybe we want to further explore, especially when I think the delineation comes up, and where I see people lean on medical cannabis is, oh, you can't take away our high-potency products because the medical patients need that. And I think there is opportunity potentially in how we are formulating products and how we are packaging products to create opportunity to gear those products towards these growing markets, like our senior citizens and people that are dealing, kind of an epidemic of mental health concerns and pain concerns.
Amber, I gotta say, as the point of sale provider, there are some states that make you differentiate the supply chain. It is an awful process. Do not do that.
What state is that? Make sure I stay out of there. But for us, when we're aggregating that capital and looking at those companies, if it was a state, and I haven't come across that, you have to tell me which one that is. That is a massive impediment to how we would provide capital and how we would underwrite that particular state. We want that product to be as flexible as possible, so that it can go through the whole ecosystem and get all the way to that point of sale. And like I said earlier, most states that once it's gone recreational, nobody's going to bother to show a medical card unless there's some aspect that they're getting a credit or a lesser price or something.
Taxation sometimes.
Yeah, and possibly there.
Before I jump to you, Michael, one of the advantages of Schedule 3 when it comes to medical is research. But it sounds like, what do you feel is the role for medical cannabis research, which again is one of the benefits we tout, if there is no delineation in the market?
Yeah, I think until going to Schedule 3 and then even beyond that, right, there's not going to be a lot of research done. The FDA doesn't want to be a part of it. Relative to the pharmaceutical overall life sciences, Terry Mendez commented on earlier, the whole cannabis market's a division of a Fortune 500. So I don't think it's caught enough attention or interest from people who are making decisions at a federal level. I think in terms of research and things like that, when the FDA does get involved, it'll apply more restrictions or guidelines for GMP certified facilities, making sure different things are up to code and standard that, I'd say certain operators, few and far between, are probably trying to go above and beyond now. But as certain parts of the industry get easier, other parts of it are going to become more challenging.
If I could just add to that, there is a research license ecosystem. It's the federal DEA license, and we own one of those. And that ecosystem is the avenue that we can go public, we can cross state lines, we can do all the things that a normal business can do. And that ecosystem was put together specifically for research. So to try to research it out of the state system it would be challenging to do it there when there's a specific federal license program already set up for it. All of our facilities are GMP certified and operate under. It's pretty funny. The DEA is the broker when we sell the product. It is the funniest thing that's who is our counterparty.
And I think bigger part of it, medical cannabis today in the U.S. is far different than it is in other countries, right? What's going on in Israel and Australia and other places from a research perspective here, and yes, there are undoubtedly, obviously the benefits from it, but we talked about tax, higher milligrams. GW Pharma is a company that is based on cannabinoids, but that's not people consuming cannabis in its raw form. And I think once that starts to happen, the medical cannabis world, what it is today, won't be anything like that down the road, right? It's not things that you get at a dispensary. It's more pharmaceutical grade products that are addressing specific illnesses or ailments.
I also think research is critical outside of the formal medical process, because I think for many of us who use cannabis for a variety of reasons, whether it be wellness or things that maybe I'd call quasi-medical, that research to help you better understand how to use it, to help you better advise customers on how they might explore using it, could be critical to millions of people having help falling asleep or avoiding anxiety or dealing with day-to-day pain. So even if we don't go down that formal route, that research is still critical potentially for millions of people living a better life.
It just dawned on me, you can't have off-shelf or off-label if you were in a pharmacy to make those recommendations. So a bed tender would be specifically breaking that law.
Well, you could still, similar to a vitamin or something like that, you could still have research that suggests what it might do for you, even if we can't formally recommend it.
Yeah.
It's heading much more towards like the nutraceutical industry, right?
Having come from the nutraceutical industry, one of the challenges there is once, I wholeheartedly believe in doing the research for a multitude of reasons. Safety, being able to, your own personal liability as a company, understanding what your product does. Over the years in the nutraceutical space, we've had to be very careful because there is a desire to invest in the research to show what it's going to do for sleep or what it's going to do for stress or healing, like muscle healing. But the challenge is, once you start talking about that, you've crossed over into pharmaceutical space. So one of the many kind of, as we're looking at maybe what it looks like when we cross over from rescheduling to legalization, is kind of a new framework. And if you noted, in 2023, FDA said the frameworks we have don't work here. And I, for once, actually agree with FDA here. And so there are bits and pieces of different frameworks, including being able to say, hey, we've got these really healthy bodies of research on these particular topics. Let us say, under certain conditions, let us say this. And so I agree that there are absolutely pathways through nutraceuticals, and I would encourage people, as we're looking at what medical cannabis is going to look like in the future, to take a look at some of those other frameworks, like medical cannabis and botanical drugs, and see what we want to borrow from that.
One of the things that makes this really complex is that typical FDA analysis and approval is a single molecule. But with cannabis, it's a multiple molecule, multiple compounds associated with an entourage effect that has a certain effect on the human body. And so I don't know if the FDA is really truly equipped at this point to really understand the multiple compound type of the industry, nutraceuticals and the like, versus just a single molecule drug type of approval process.
I believe they are equipped to understand it, whether or not they have the resources and it's a priority to understand it, and then when they understand it, trying to figure out where it belongs, because it doesn't really fit any of the existing, whether it's botanical drugs, nutraceuticals, food, none of them, or drugs. I want to turn to you, Michael, and delve a little bit deeper into the conversation around risk, because you touched on it a little bit earlier with increased scrutiny. And I again, some of the fears that we hear are, as FDA going to start kind of cracking down and looking at us a little bit closer? Is pharma going to push and try and shut us down? So when it comes to scrutiny and increased scrutiny, and you coming from, again, the risk, the insurance and risk perspective, will this at all change the way you all are examining risk?
I think it will. Probably not as great of an impact as many would think. So there's not to go too much into the nuance around it, but a lot of the bigger carriers that just won't touch any part of cannabis, especially from a liability perspective. So I think until it's federally legalized, you won't. There is a handful of groups that are, even that are publicly traded, and they're underwriting things that aren't as related to product liability. But like directors and officers insurance, AXA XL is the biggest, in North America that does it. They offer D&O insurance for the cannabis space, public and private companies. So I think it'll continue to have other insurers interested in the space. Probably some of their non-admitted arms, though, things that are doing similar to nutraceutical work, rather than, today there's, a half dozen to a dozen cannabis-focused carriers, and then you'll get around workers' compensation, right? That's pretty standard. If somebody's an employee at a warehouse or a retail facility, it's not drastically different from a different vertical. And similar exposures from a director's officers, whether it's insolvency or if you're public, you're dealing with derivative class action lawsuits. Those apply no matter what. So it'll be not as big of a movement, I think, as most people would like.
It's going to take a couple of years for the risk dust to settle, because with the change in the definition of hemp and the limits on the amount of cannabinoids and THC content, this will impact the marijuana industry to the tune of about $500 million in revenue. That's directly derived from hemp-based products. And then there's going to be increased costs associated with their formulations for wellness and other products. And so that's going to have an impact on margins. So it's going to take a while for them, the investor risk, to understand the impact that hemp has had on the marijuana industry before they can see the growth that's derived from the forced consolidation that occurs, as a result of this and as a result of Schedule 3.
Yeah.
Thank you. I see Brett is going to pull us off the stage momentarily here. But I just wanted to thank everybody, thank Ignite, and just say that, medical cannabis is what got us here. And I think the events and the chaos of the last week, it would be great. And we talk about building a big tent. Never has our tent been bigger than when we look at the people who cannabis serves, or medical cannabis serves. And so taking some time to reflect on the impact there. So thank you.
And if I can quickly just say thank you to Ignited and especially USCR. If you guys aren't familiar with USCR, it's the perfect time to get involved. We need everyone active helping support federal reform together. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And don't forget, I'm still selling official Beau Whitney fan club t-shirts. I'm never going to let that go. So next up is The Grand Bargain, featuring Danielle Bernstein, Jim Higdon, Dave Votrin, Maddox Swinson, and moderated by Eric Berlin. Come on up to the stage, y'all.